I had always loved my home. Nestled in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, it was my slice of paradise, a place where I could unwind after long days and enjoy the fruits of my labor, quite literally. My backyard was filled with fruit trees, each planted with purpose. The apple tree near the fence had been a gift from my late grandfather, the orange tree by the patio had been a childhood favorite, and the cherry blossom tree in the corner had been a wedding anniversary present from my spouse. These trees weren't just trees, they were living memories. But beyond the sentimentality, they served a practical purpose too. Every summer, my trees bore bountiful harvests, apples, oranges, peaches, and pears that I shared freely with neighbors. It was a small tradition in our community. Kids would come by, excited to grab a fresh apple straight from the branch, and elderly neighbors would thank me for the free fruit that saved them a few grocery trips. No one had ever complained. At least, not until she arrived. HOAs are a double-edged sword. When run properly, they maintain order, keep the neighborhood looking nice, and resolve disputes fairly. But in the wrong hands, they turn into something much worse, a playground for power-hungry enforcers who thrive on making others miserable. Enter Karen, our new HOA president. Karen had moved in just a few months prior, and it didn't take long for her to make her presence known. She wasn't like the other HOA leaders who kept things fair and reasonable. No, Karen wanted control, complete, unquestioned authority over the neighborhood. The first few weeks of her reign had been annoying but manageable. She started with small infractions, mailboxes that weren't the approved shade of black, holiday decorations that were up a day too long, and yard signs she deemed too distracting. Then, one day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. You are in violation of HOA Policy 47B. Non-decorative trees must be removed immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action. I read the notice twice, then a third time. My trees had been there for over a decade, and no one had ever objected. There was no such 47B rule that I was aware of. Something didn't add up. I glanced around the neighborhood and saw other homes with trees, shade trees, decorative trees, and even other fruit trees. So why was I being targeted? That's when I saw her standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. Karen. That was the moment I knew. This was just the beginning of a fight I never asked for. Karen had only been in the neighborhood for a few months, but she had already made herself the undisputed ruler of the HOA. Unlike past HOA presidents, who kept things fair and balanced, Karen seemed to believe the HOA was her personal kingdom. She issued notices like they were candy and handed out fines for the smallest infractions. Lawn too tall? Fine. Trash bins out a minute past collection? Fine. A kid's basketball hoop in the driveway? Fine. Her power trip was impossible to ignore. She walked around the neighborhood with a clipboard and a scowl, knocking on doors, snapping pictures, and lecturing homeowners about rules that most of us had never even heard of. If you question her, she'd hit you with the classic Karen line. It's in the HOA guidelines. You should have read the contract. No one liked her, but people feared her because she knew how to weaponize the HOA rules against them. And since most homeowners didn't have time to fight over every nonsense violation, they just paid the fines and moved on. But me, I wasn't about to back down. I had never seen anything in the HOA rules about fruit trees. My trees had been there for over a decade, and no previous HOA president had ever mentioned them. So why was it suddenly an issue now? That's when I did some digging. The HOA handbook had clear guidelines on maintaining lawns, fences, and home exteriors. But there was nothing about fruit trees. Nothing in the landscaping section, nothing under plant regulations, nothing at all. So where was Karen getting this so-called 47B rule from? I had a sinking feeling in my gut. This wasn't about the trees. This was about power. Karen wanted to see if I would bend to her authority, if I would comply without question like everyone else. She was testing me. But what she didn't know, what she had no clue about, was that I wrote the HOA rules. I wasn't just another homeowner. I had been part of the original HOA board that helped draft the very guidelines Karen was now trying to twist for her own benefit. She thought she could bully me into submission. She was dead wrong. Karen was furious that I didn't immediately comply with her absurd demand. I could see it in her eyes the next time she walked past my property, staring at my fruit trees like they had personally offended her. A few days later, I received an official violation notice in the mail. Violation: unauthorized fruit trees on property. Fine $250 per tree. Resolution required. Immediate removal. It was laughable. There was zero basis for this fine in the actual HOA regulations. But Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about control. She was banking on the idea that I would cave under pressure, just like the others. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I calmly drafted an appeal letter citing the exact sections of the HOA handbook that proved my fruit trees were in full compliance. I sent the appeal directly to the HOA board, bypassing Karen entirely. She hated that. The next morning, she was at my doorstep. Clipboard in hand, fake smile plastered on her face. "Morning, neighbor," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "I noticed you received your violation letter. Just wanted to check in and see when you'll be removing those trees. We wouldn't want to escalate things, would we?" I smiled right back. "Oh, don't worry, Karen. I've already sent an appeal to the board. You should be hearing back from them soon." Her smile disappeared instantly. "Oh, that won't be necessary," she scoffed. "The rules are clear. The fine stands." I folded my arms. Actually, the rules say nothing about fruit trees. I should know. I helped write them. Karen blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For a brief moment, she looked genuinely shocked. Then, just as quickly, she regained her composure. "Well," she sniffed, "maybe it's time we revise those rules." And with that, she turned on her heel and stormed off. I knew what was coming next. Karen wasn't going to admit defeat. She was going to double down. And that's exactly what she did. Karen was the type of person who couldn't handle losing control. If she couldn't get what she wanted through rules, she'd resort to manipulation and intimidation instead. A few days after our conversation, I started noticing strange things happening around my property. First, I received anonymous complaints about my fruit trees. According to Karen, multiple concerned residents had reported that the trees were heavy check mark, attracting pests. Heavy check mark, dropping fruit on sidewalks, creating hazards. Heavy check mark, ruining neighborhood aesthetics. None of this was true. My trees were healthy, well-maintained, and nowhere near public walkways. It was obvious Karen herself had filed these complaints, trying to make it seem like the neighborhood was against me. Then things escalated. One morning, I woke up to find several of my trees had been mysteriously damaged. Someone had hacked at the lower branches, leaving them mangled and broken. I checked my security cameras, and there she was, Karen, sneaking into my yard at 2 a.m., armed with pruning shears. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't just pushing fines and rules. She was outright vandalizing my property. I knew I had her now. Instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to play the long game. I gathered all the evidence. Video camera security footage of her trespassing and damaging my trees. Scroll official HOA bylaws proving my trees were fully compliant. Envelope with arrow records of Karen's false complaints. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make sure Karen regretted ever messing with me. And the next step in my plan, taking this to the HOA board and exposing Karen for who she really was. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived, and I walked in with confidence, carrying my stack of evidence. Karen, sitting at the head of the table like she owned a place, gave me a smug glance, probably assuming she had already won. But today, she was in for the biggest shock of her life. The meeting started with routine business, but when it came time for resident concerns, I calmly raised my hand. I'd like to address an issue regarding my property and the actions of a particular HOA member. Karen sat up straight, eyes narrowing. I started by reading the official HOA bylaws, highlighting the sections that explicitly allowed fruit trees on private property. According to HOA guidelines, my trees are fully compliant with all regulations. Yet, I've received multiple anonymous complaints, each of them citing reasons that don't align with the actual bylaws. Some of the other board members exchanged glances. One of them, Mr. Henderson, a retired lawyer, nodded in agreement. Karen scoffed, arms crossed. Well, if multiple people have complained, then obviously it's an issue for the community. We can't just let one homeowner decide what's best. I held up my hand, cutting her off. That's not all. I pulled out my security footage, connected my laptop to the meeting room's projector, and hit play. On screen, clear as day, was Karen sneaking into my yard at 2 a.m., pruning shears in hand, hacking away at my trees. The room fell silent. Karen's face went from arrogant to ghost white in an instant. Is that Karen? One of the board members muttered. Karen jumped up. This is ridiculous. That could be anyone. You can't even see. I zoomed in. The security camera had caught everything. Her face, her outfit, and even the way she glanced around nervously before damaging the trees. So, Karen, would you like to explain why you were trespassing on my property and vandalizing my trees in the middle of the night? I asked, leaning forward. She stammered. I was just trimming them. I was doing the neighborhood a favor. The board members weren't buying it. Mr. Henderson, the retired lawyer, spoke up. This is blatant property damage and trespassing. Not only is this a violation of HOA ethics, but it's also a criminal offense. Karen's jaw dropped. She had lost control of the situation. One of the other board members whispered to another, could she even stay on the HOA after this? That's when I decided to drop the final bombshell. I pulled out the HOA charter, a document I knew better than anyone because, as Karen was about to find out, I had written it. I flipped to a specific page and pointed at a clause. Any HOA board member found guilty of vandalism, harassment, or malicious damage to another homeowner's property shall be immediately removed from their position, pending legal action. The room fell silent. I turned to Karen. Since you love enforcing the rules so much, I assume you'll have no problem abiding by this one? Karen's face turned red. She had no way out. The board unanimously voted to remove her from her position, and I made it clear that I would be pressing charges for trespassing and property damage. Karen wasn't just losing her power, she was about to lose a whole lot more. But this wasn't over yet, because Karen, in her desperation, was about to make a fatal mistake. Karen was furious. She had just been publicly humiliated, stripped of her power, and caught on camera committing a crime. But instead of backing down, she did what entitled people do best. She doubled down. The very next morning, I woke up to find an official-looking letter taped to my door. It was from the HOA, stamped with the association seal, and signed by Karen. I raised an eyebrow. Karen wasn't even on the board anymore. She had been fired last night. Yet here she was, sending out fake violation notices as if she were still in charge. I unfolded the letter and read it. Dear homeowner, due to repeated violations of the HOA's aesthetic standards, you are hereby ordered to remove all remaining fruit trees within 48 hours or face daily fines of $500. Failure to comply will result in further HOA action. Regards, Karen S., HOA Compliance Officer. I actually laughed out loud. She was bluffing. Not only was she no longer on the board, but I had personally written the HOA rules, and nowhere in them did it say anything about fruit trees being prohibited. But Karen didn't stop there. Within an hour, she was outside my property, clipboard in hand, taking pictures of my trees like some kind of deranged detective. She was actually trying to enforce her own made-up rules, as if she were still in charge. Then, as if that wasn't enough, I saw her pull out her phone and make a call. It didn't take long to figure out who she was calling, because 20 minutes later, a city code enforcement officer pulled up in front of my house. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching as Karen marched up to the officer, pointing dramatically at my property like I had committed some kind of serious crime. There. You see that? She said, practically foaming at the mouth. This homeowner is in blatant violation of community standards. The officer, looking somewhat confused, took out his notepad. What seems to be the issue? Karen scoffed. The trees. He has fruit trees. They're against the rules, and he refuses to comply with HOA regulations. I want you to issue a citation immediately. The officer turned to me. Sir, is that true? Are these trees violating HOA policy? I didn't even try to hide my smirk. Well, officer, there's something you should know. I walked over to my porch, grabbed a thick binder, the official HOA rulebook, and flipped it open to the landscaping section. Then, with absolute confidence, I handed it over to the officer. He skimmed the pages and frowned. There's nothing in here about fruit trees being prohibited, he said, looking up at Karen. Karen blinked rapidly. But that can't be right. That's a mistake. They're disruptive to the community. The officer's frown deepened. Ma'am, HOA rules don't override city ordinances, and in this state, homeowners are legally allowed to grow fruit trees on their private property. This is completely within his rights. Karen's mouth fell open. Then it got even better. The officer gave me a knowing look. Sir, are you the one who wrote this HOA rulebook? I nodded. I am. The officer chuckled and shook his head. Ma'am, he said, turning back to Karen, it sounds like you've been wasting my time. This homeowner is fully within his rights, and you're no longer on the board. If you continue harassing him, I'll have to start looking into legal consequences for false complaints. Karen's face turned beet red. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. She was completely defeated. The officer tipped his hat at me. Have a nice day, sir. Karen, on the other hand, stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and not over yet. But as she stomped back to her house, I knew the war was already won. Or at least, I thought it was. Because Karen wasn't done making a fool of herself just yet. She had one last desperate move up her sleeve, and it would be her biggest mistake yet. After being publicly humiliated twice, Karen disappeared for a few days. No emails. No fake violations. No surprise complaints. For a moment, I thought she had finally given up. But then on Friday morning, something happened that made me realize Karen was far from finished. I woke up to the sound of power tools. Buzzing, sawing, chopping. At first, I thought it was one of my neighbors doing some early morning yard work. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. Karen was in my yard. And she wasn't alone. She had hired a landscaping crew, a group of men in neon vests who were currently hacking away at my fruit trees with chainsaws and pruning shears. I felt a surge of pure rage. I stormed across my lawn, heart pounding, and yelled over the noise. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? Karen turned around, completely unfazed. Her arms were crossed, and she had that self-satisfied smirk on her face, the one she always wore when she thought she was untouchable. Oh, good morning, she said casually, like we were neighbors having a friendly chat. I sent you a final notice about these illegal fruit trees, and since you refused to comply, I've taken matters into my own hands. I was so stunned, I actually laughed. You've lost your damn mind, I said. First of all, these trees aren't illegal. Second, you don't have the authority to do this. And third, I gestured toward the workers. You just trespassed on my property and destroyed my personal property. That's felony vandalism. Karen's smirk didn't fade. She shrugged. I have the right to enforce the rules when a homeowner refuses to comply. I stared at her. Then I pulled out my phone. Let's find out if the police agree with you. Karen's smug expression faltered. She hadn't expected me to call her bluff. Wait, she stammered, suddenly looking panicked. You don't have to do that. We can settle this like adults. Oh, we absolutely will, I said. But I want the cops here to witness it. I dialed 911, and within 10 minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. Karen turned pale as the officers approached. I didn't waste any time. I pointed at my yard, where my fruit trees had been reduced to hacked-up stumps. This woman trespassed on my property and hired a crew to destroy my trees without my consent. One of the officers turned to Karen. Ma'am, is that true? Karen stiffened. I was just enforcing the HOA rules. The officer's expression didn't change. And do the HOA rules give you the legal right to enter private property and destroy someone's trees? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. She knew she was screwed. The officer pulled out a notepad. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to provide your full name. Right now, you're looking at trespassing and property destruction charges. Karen's jaw dropped. Wait. You can't charge me. I was just. The officer held up a hand. You're not under arrest yet, but if the homeowner decides to press charges, that's up to him. Karen whipped around to face me. Her smug attitude was gone. Now she looked desperate. Come on, she pleaded. You don't have to do this. We're neighbors. You wouldn't really send me to jail over some trees, would you? I crossed my arms. Karen, let me explain something to you. You've been harassing me from the day I moved in. You abused your power as HOA president. You tried to enforce fake rules. And now you've committed a crime. You don't get to play the friendly neighbor card now. Karen swallowed hard. I could see the wheels turning in her head, desperately searching for a way out. But then I dropped the final bombshell. I turned to the police officer and said, I'd like to press charges. Karen made a strangled noise. The officers immediately stepped forward. Ma'am, please turn around, one of them said. Karen screamed. No. Wait. You can't do this, she cried as the officers pulled out their handcuffs. But I just stood there, watching with pure satisfaction as she was placed under arrest. As they escorted her to the squad car, Karen thrashed. This isn't fair. I was just following the rules. I'll get a lawyer. You haven't heard the last of me. I smirked. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. With that, the squad car pulled away, taking Karen to face the consequences of her actions. And as I stood in my yard, looking at the ruins of my trees, I realized something. I might have lost my fruit trees, but I had won the war. And Karen, she had lost everything.